Hi, and welcome to One Simple Recipe, where we're hoping to get you one step closer to better health. My name is Judy Matusky, and I'm a registered and licensed dietitian as well as a culinary nutritionist with Athens Nutrition. And today we're bringing you another one of our One Simple recipes, and this is Vietnamese meatballs. So this month we're sort of dedicating to meatballs, although I'm using ground turkey instead of red meat in the recipes, but we can talk about that. Last week we did the chicken piccata meatballs, which were fabulous. I hope you tried them. So we're bringing you another really intensely flavorful, very vibrant meatball. And if you like a lot of flavor, I think you're going to love these meatballs. All right. As I mentioned, we are going to be using ground turkey. That is not traditionally, obviously, Vietnamese. These would most likely be made with ground pork or ground beef. I just tend to use something a little bit leaner, but if you want to use the ground pork and the ground beef, please do so. All right. So we're going to start by just mixing these together. I'm going to form the meatballs, and then we'll talk a little bit about the sauce, and that's what really makes this super special. All right, so with this recipe, we're going to just bring together several ingredients that we'll combine first before we add the ground turkey and the panko or the breadcrumbs. Just because when you're making meatballs, you know, one of the things we kind of want to be aware of is that we just don't want to really handle the meat that much. The idea is to try to get these as light as possible. I think meatballs are great no matter how they come out, but the less you actually use your hands when the meat's in there, the better. So if you can kind of mix some of these ingredients before you add the ground turkey or the meat that you're using, that would even be better. So we've got 2 eggs going in here, and now we're going to add something called fish sauce. The fish sauce is a very intense, it is fermented fish. Typically it's anchovies with salt. That should be all it is. The red boat is one of my favorites, easy to get. And the only ingredients are anchovies and salt. Now, with fish sauce, yes, it's a little fishy, it's a little funky, it's very intense, very umami, very strong. You don't need much, but boy, does it make a difference in recipes. It just really elevates the flavor, more than I think anything that I've ever used. So 1 teaspoon goes a long way. We're going to actually use 2 tablespoons in this because we're using quite a bit of ground turkey, and we really, really want to bring the flavor in. So if you've not used it before, I would really recommend it. Just grab some and try it. I often will use it just as a background in sauces, marinades, sometimes even salad dressings, because a little bit goes a long way, and it does have a pretty funky aroma. But once it's mixed in, it's not going to be this fermented fish forward flavor. That's not what you're going to get. All right, then we're going to do, because we'll talk about, I already zested some lime. I have my zester out or my microplane, and I think I could chop this, but because I already have this out, like if you have one tool that already gets dirty, and you might as well try to use it then several other ways, right? So I am just going to, I have a pretty large garlic clove, and I'm going to go ahead and just use the zester to do that. You can certainly chop it, but sometimes I really do like to use this zester because sometimes I really want a real fine garlic minced. And in this particular recipe I do, because we're not sauteing this garlic or anything to mellow it out. It's just going to cook in the meatballs, and I don't necessarily want to have anybody chomping into a fairly large clove of or a large piece of garlic that maybe hasn't cooked all the way through, so it'd be pretty strong. And plus we're going to do the same thing. I think, well, maybe garlic. No, we're not using garlic for the sauce. But for sauces, when I'm making a sauce that I'm using that I'm not cooking, or if I'm making a marinade, or if I'm making a salad dressing and it calls for garlic, I almost always microplane or grate it like this, because that way you can get it really fine, and you don't get those really sharp pieces of raw garlic. Some of you may like that. I don't particularly. All right, and then we're going to do the same with the ginger. And as I mentioned, I almost always, when I get ginger, I get usually a pretty big root, and then I slice it into pieces, and then I put it in a jar with some usually white wine, because that's usually what I have, and keep it covered in the refrigerator, and it lasts, I don't know, I'm not going to say forever, but pretty long. The other thing is that you can certainly buy them in little frozen pellets. So you can get frozen ginger that's already chopped, frozen garlic that's already chopped, cilantro, other herbs, and they're kind of nice, especially if you don't do a lot of cooking, and it might not be worth it for you to buy a whole big root of ginger, or maybe you buy fresh garlic, but you just don't use it enough. So that's when I think those frozen little pucks that you can buy, they last, again, a really long time in your freezer, and you can just take out what you need, and then you're not wasting anything. Because again, I just feel like when it comes to food waste, anything you can do, not only to make things easier for you, but also just for just so you don't waste it, I think is a really great idea. But because I do cook so much, that I just use the fresh ginger and the fresh garlic, because I tend to go through it pretty quickly. All right, so we have the grated ginger, we have the grated garlic. I already zested 1.5 limes, so that's here in this little bowl that I'm going to add. And I have just a little bit of the lime left to zest. And for those of you that maybe don't zest your citrus, then again, you're just taking your microplane and you're just running it across the surface of the lime. We're just trying to get just that outer skin where all of the flavor and the oil is from the lime. And you don't necessarily want that white pith that's below it. That tends to be bitter, whether it's lemons, limes, oranges. So we're just really taking this really thin outer peel off with the zester, and so we're trying to get it down to that, and add that in. So that was the zest of actually 2 limes, and we're going to use the lime juice for the sauce. So we're going to use both limes, and that's another thing when you have citrus. If you can, zest it first and add it to whatever you're making, because it's just going to add more citrusy flavor, and then juice it. So then you kind of are using more of the whole fruit. All right. So now we're going to add a little bit of spice to this. So I'm going to use some red pepper flakes, about 1/4 teaspoon. That's kind of up to you. It depends on how spicy you want these. I want a little heat, but not a ton. So I'm just going to go with 1/4 teaspoon. And then I pre-chopped about 4 to 6 scallions. So some of these are going to be garnish. I'm going to try to grab the white part of the scallion, and that's going in. I like a lot of scallion in this, so I'm probably using more like 5 scallions, especially I'm getting all the whites for the most part with some of the green. And I'm going to just save some of the green for later, because we'll use some of that in the sauce, and then you can use it for the garnish as well. All right, and then we are adding, the one thing that we're going to use is we're going to use mint. And this is, the herbs are coming out. Our herbs are really starting to grow. So we're really getting mint and parsley in the garden. This is some beautiful mint that I picked this morning from our garden. And I'm going to use fresh mint. This recipe originally called for fresh mint, although sometimes I don't have fresh mint. And then I'll use dried mint. I love dried mint. Love, love, love it. If you don't have this in your pantry, please grab some. It's definitely a different minty flavor than fresh mint. It's a little more earthy. I think it's even a little sweeter. And the mint that we're using is spearmint, just so that you know. I do get questions about that. And peppermint and spearmint are more likely the mints you're gonna see most often. But there are all kinds of mints. But the peppermint is pretty strong. I only use that if I'm using, in tea for the most part. I don't typically cook with peppermint. So spearmint is usually the one that that's going to show up in most recipes. All right, so we have the mint. It's about 3 tablespoons, give or take, of fresh mint. But if you don't have fresh mint, then maybe it would be about 1 tablespoon of dried mint. I've just been using dried mint a lot more in a lot of my recipes. I'll add it to yogurt when I'm making sauces. It's great in meatballs. I could be using the dried mint in here instead. It would add even a little more intense flavor. But because I had this beautiful fresh mint, I really want to use it. But I absolutely love it. Middle Eastern cooking is really where you see a lot of the dried mint being used, but it adds a real interesting flavor. So that might be a little bit more than 3 tablespoons, but that's fine. Okay, So I think that is everything right now. So just to recap, let me just clean off my cutting board a little bit. Just to recap, in here we have the 2 eggs, we have the fish sauce, we have the garlic, we have the ginger that we minced, we have the red pepper flakes, and then about 4 or 5 scallions that I chopped up, leaving at least 1 or 2 more that I'll use for the sauce and also for the garnish. Then we did the zest of the 2 limes that went in, and then a little fresh mint. So, you know, a little longer than our 5 ingredients, but a lot of these things you should have around in your pantries, in your kitchen. All right, so let's just go ahead. Actually, let me just use this spoon. We're gonna mix this around, and then we're gonna add the ground turkey, and then we'll add, originally panko crumbs would be the type of breadcrumb that would be a little more traditional. I usually don't have panko. I always have some breadcrumbs, whole wheat breadcrumbs that I made last week. We made these in the food processor. If you saw that video where I just dried out some whole wheat bread, I think this was Ezekiel bread, and processed it in the food processor. And then I put this in the freezer. I keep this jar in the freezer. So those are from last week. So I pulled them out, and we're going to use those today. All right. So we have the mixture all together, and now we're going to add, this is about 1.5 pounds of the ground turkey. And like I said, that is definitely not traditionally Vietnamese for sure, but if you wanted to use ground pork, if you wanted to use ground beef, that's fine. I'm just trying to keep this a little bit leaner, so that's why I'm using the ground turkey, because you really would have to go to the higher fat level of the beef or the pork to really get the flavor that you'd want. There's no point to do ground turkey, lean ground turkey, and then get lean ground beef. It's going to end up being the same in flavor, and it's a little bit healthier to go with the ground turkey. So for that reason, I just always use ground turkey because that's just what I have. I don't tend to use a lot of ground beef or ground pork, but you can. All right, so this is about a cup of the whether you're using panko or whether you're using your own breadcrumbs. Like I said, I had mine. So now I'm just going to mix it around, and ideally you could easily just get your fingers in here, your hands in here, which I probably will do here in a minute. Again, trying not to overwork this as much as you can. I mean, you obviously have to get it mixed together, but all you're just trying to do is bring all of those ingredients in with the turkey as well as the breadcrumbs, getting them mixed in. All right, I am going to just go to fingers at this point. I'll use the spoon just to create the meatballs here in a second. And then, you know, again, when you're using raw turkey or raw meat, just, you know, be mindful of, you know, keeping your hands clean if you're working with it between, you know, before you're, you know, maybe touching or using something else, or with the cutting board, like I just am laying it on a paper towel. This spoon, I just don't particularly want the raw turkey on my cutting board. So again, you know, just keeping mindful of food safety in the kitchen. It's unlikely that there'll probably be an issue, but I think better safe than sorry, right? Okay, so now I have a parchment lined baking sheet, and we're gonna make about, you know, golf ball size meatballs, and just lightly roll them, kind of like if you watched last week. We're just, you know, a little light. They're fairly moist meatballs. I mean, they're pretty wet, but they form. They certainly come together. All right, and if you're with these, you will get if you're making them about the size of give or take the size of a golf ball, you should get, I think it's about 25 meatballs from this. And if you can, you know, kind of crowd them together on here, you're not touching, but you can get all 25 on one baking sheet. I've done that. Now last week, when we made the chicken piccata meatballs, I didn't roast or bake them in a high oven. I actually browned those in a skillet on the stove because I really wanted the brown bits. I really wanted the fond, it's called, on the bottom of the pan to help create the sauce that we were cooking the meatballs in for the chicken piccata. But like I said, 99% of the time when I'm making meatballs, I always will be baking them on a baking sheet. And it's usually in, I usually do it in about a 400 to 425 degree oven. So today I'm using 400, and it's maybe the middle rack that I'm going to be putting these on. Because with this particular recipe, we're not cooking these in a sauce after they come out of the oven. So these need to be cooked all the way through. And if I had the oven set at 425, they might start to get too brown before they can cook all the way through. So just a little lower oven for this, because they're really going to be in the oven for a good 25 minutes, and obviously we're not going to stay on until they come out, because that would just be a little too long. But you just want to maybe halfway through flip them over, and in about 25 minutes in a 400 degree oven, they should all be browned up and cooked all the way through. All right, let me just wash my hands real quick, because I'm not going to finish those meatballs right now. I'll finish those later, and then I'll pop them in the oven and cook them off. But I want to go and I want to make the sauce for you. So let me just clean up here a little bit. So I'm going to move this off to the side. I'll finish up those meatballs later, and then, like I said, 400 degree oven for about 25 minutes, but halfway through, you're going to want to flip them. All right, so let's make the sauce. And so the meatballs themselves are a pretty intense flavor, which that's the other thing with this recipe I love, because you can use the ground turkey, because ground turkey isn't nearly as flavorful, and we're not getting the richness from the fat from like you would in ground pork. But because there's so much flavor in this, it doesn't really matter that you're using something leaner. But the sauce is really intense. I mean, it's a very intense sauce. So a little bit goes a long way. So when you make this, you only need a little drizzle on the meatball. All right. So we're using very similar ingredients that we had used for the meatballs. Only this, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of like an Asian chili sauce. I have to be honest with you, I'm not even sure what that actually means. There are so many sauces out there on the market. I'm using what I have. This is a garlic chili crunch oil. Sometimes I use the S&B chili crunch garlic oil. This may not be real traditional as far as what this recipe might originally have been calling for, but it works. So we're going to use 2 tablespoons of this. And I'll tell you, some of the sauces do have MSG, and I'm kind of on the fence with that. I know the research says it's fine to be using it. I don't know how I feel. I'm not sure the connection between MSG and maybe anybody who might be suffering from migraines or have that as a concern. I can't validate that with research, but this does not have any MSG. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. If I have an option, but it certainly is something that is such a flavor agent. MSG, oh my gosh, it really enhances the flavor of whatever you're using. All right, so this is about 2 tablespoons of a Asian chili sauce. You have to kind of monitor the hotness, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but if it's really hot, you might want to go a little less. Okay, now we're going to use 1/4 teaspoon of soy sauce. I always use the tamari, which is usually a little lower in sodium naturally than regular soy sauce. This is actually a reduced sodium tamari. Still going to have plenty of sodium and plenty of flavor. But if you're sodium sensitive, which a lot of my clients are, then I appreciate that. So I just, giving you a heads up that you can bring the sodium down a little bit, but without really compromising on flavor. Then we're going to go back to our fish sauce. We're going to use this again. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of fish sauce to this. I think the original recipe called for more, and in my opinion, at this point, that was a little too intense. I dropped it down to just 1 tablespoon. And then then we're going to use the limes. We have the 2 limes that we have. Let me see, I don't think okay, I don't need this anymore. Put this off to the side. The 2 limes that we have, that we had zested. Let me just cut these in half. And limes are really tricky to squeeze. They just are. They do not want to give up their juice. I don't know what it is. Lemons I can just squeeze by hand and they're fine. I must always have to get my citrus juicer out, because limes they're just harder. I find it harder. They're certainly a lot easier if you have them at room temperature, or if you have a cold lime, than just if you pop it into your microwave for a few seconds just to warm it a little bit, or bring it to kind of more to room temperature. Then they definitely give up their juice a lot easier If they are cold out of the refrigerator, forget it. I had these sitting on my counter for about 2 hours, so they are very room temperature. And the juice, I probably could have just squeezed these by hand. It is releasing the juice really easily. So the juice of 2 limes. So we used the zest of the 2 limes in the meatball mixture, and we're using the juice now of the 2 limes in our sauce. And then we are adding about 3 tablespoons of just regular sugar to this. And that's the one thing with Vietnamese, flavors. It really is really interesting, intense flavors of that combination of saltiness and sweetness and sourness and maybe a little bit of bitter and a little umami. It's all of those flavors together is what I love about. And I am not certainly an expert on Vietnamese cooking. I don't cook that way a lot, but I do love the flavors. And I just love this recipe, and I wanted to bring it to you because it really is, yes, it has a few more ingredients, but it's really very simple. So here's our sauce. Now, that's pretty much it. So then I'm telling you, like, this little drizzle over your meatballs is probably about all you need. So you're gonna have quite a bit of this left. You can use this, over rice. So when the meatballs come out of the oven, there's a couple different ways this is all you would need to do, but because I do have extra scallions, I can use some for the garnish as well, but I'm gonna add some of my chopped scallions to the sauce. And I think I might even go back and add, because I have the fresh mint, and since I used the mint in the, in the meatballs, why not complement the flavor in the sauce? So I might just add a little bit of fresh mint, not a lot, maybe like less than a tablespoon probably, into the sauce as well. But when these meatballs are finished, then you have your meatballs, and then you can serve them over rice. You can serve them over rice noodles, and with the little drizzle of the sauce. They're really, really good. If you want them like a real light summer kind of meal, you can put them in lettuce wraps and with the sauce. You can make sandwiches with them, but they're just such a great, intensely flavorful meatball and recipe when we're trying to cook healthier, and we can't rely a lot necessarily on the high fat content of pork or bacon or butter or heavy creams. You are trying to bring the intensity of flavor in other ways, and this recipe really, really ticks all of the boxes in regard to that. So I'd love for you to give it a try. If you have any questions, always reach out or let me know if you've made anything or you have suggestions for me. I would love that. We have next week. Now, I think this is the last of our meatballs. No. Next week we're doing herby meatballs with a pickle rice. This is one of my favorite meatball recipes, but the one we're making next week is my all-time favorite. It's amazing. So we have one more to go for next week, and then we're going to jump into some tips with tofu. We are going to be doing some tofu. I get so many questions all the time from my clients and from everyone about cooking with tofu, and how do you use it? And then they try it and they don't quite have the right recipe, and then they don't like it, and then because it doesn't have a lot of flavor. So we're gonna spend some time talking about that and using tofu in different ways. So hope you'll join me. That's going to take us through the month of May. All right. So I will see you next week. Stay well until then. Bye bye.